Get ready to discover a story that spans generations. All my life, I thought I knew my grandfather, until his death revealed a secret buried for decades, a lost gospel hidden to protect the true essence of the faith. On this moving journey, discover how love, courage, and silence shaped one family's destiny and can change the way you see life. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that inspire and transform. My name is Daniel, and for a long time, I believed I knew every bit of my family's history. I grew up hearing the same stories repeated on Sunday nights, while the coffee smoke mixed with the strong smell of the old wood in my grandfather's house. Those stories always had a simple hero, himself, Antonio Romano, a man of few words, with calloused hands and a look so distant that, even when smiling, he never seemed to be completely there. When he died on a grey October morning, there was no grand wake, no great tributes, just a few neighbors, fellow churchgoers, and we, the grandchildren, lined up awkwardly, trying to honor someone who seemed so immense, and at the same time, so unattainable. It was raining a light drizzle, the kind of rain that doesn't wet you but seeps into your soul. I remember standing in front of the open grave, watching the coffin slowly descend, as if I expected my grandfather to bang on the lid at any moment and tell me that this was all just another one of his cruel jokes. But there was no knock, no joke, no smile, just silence. It was then that I realized how much I really didn't know that man. So a few days later, we went to the old house to organize his belongings. The house was an extension of him. Thick walls, old furniture, the smell of history permeating every crack in the floor. With each drawer opened, each cardboard box piled up, the emptiness inside me grew. There was nothing there that really told who he was. Until, late in the afternoon, something unusual happened. As I tidied up the old room he never let anyone into, the room my grandmother said was all his, I stepped on a floorboard that gave slightly under my weight. I knelt down, curious. With an old pocket knife, I pried the edge loose. The piece of wood lifted easily, revealing a small hiding place. Inside was a package wrapped in thick cloth, tied with weathered twine. My fingers trembled as I pulled it out. I carefully unrolled the fabric and found a bundle of yellowed letters tied with red ribbon, and next to them, a small iron locket, worn but still incredibly beautiful. At the top of the first letter, there was only one inscription in firm handwriting: "To Daniel, when I can no longer tell my story." My heart raced. I took the package into the living room, sat down on the old sofa where I had so often seen my grandfather dozing silently, and began to read. The first letter bore no date, just words that seemed to carry the weight of an entire life. If you are reading this, it is because I can no longer keep what I have experienced to myself. Not everything we are fits into what we show. There are truths that we prefer to hide, not out of shame but out of love. You deserve to know who I was, not the Antonio who taught you how to fish, not the stubborn old man who scolded you when you forgot to wash your hands, but the man who in silence chose pain to protect what he loved most. Tears filled my eyes before I even realized it. My grandfather, the Iron Man, was showing me his more human side. I continued reading. The following letters formed a mosaic of memories, stories of youth, of abandoned dreams, of choices made in the shadow of difficult times. There were vague mentions of a woman, Elisa, a name he had never heard in the family. And with each page turned, the figure of my grandfather, whom I thought I knew, disintegrated and reconstructed itself before me in completely new contours. In the third letter, things became even more mysterious. He spoke of secret meetings in a small train station, of promises made at the risk of their lives, of a separation forced by the storm, a word that seemed to carry a larger meaning, political perhaps, that he avoided naming directly. Sometimes, Daniel, to love is to let go. Sometimes to protect is to disappear. I sat there holding those words like a double-edged sword. What exactly did my grandfather sacrifice? Why did he hide this from all of us? I couldn't sleep that night. The reliquary called to me as if it carried an even deeper secret. It was small, about the size of the palm of a hand, with faint inscriptions around the edges. I carefully forced the lid off. Inside, I found something that chilled my blood. A piece of paper folded many times, so old it looked on the verge of disintegrating. I opened it slowly. It was a map, handmade. It marked a specific location, a small village a few miles away, a place my family had always avoided mentioning. Next to the map, a word, Elisa, the same as the reports, the woman who seemed to have been the reason for a lifetime of silence. And I knew I had to go there, that I needed to find out what had been buried along with my grandfather's memories, even if it meant facing truths that could change everything I thought I knew about my family, about my past, and about myself. Dawn found me still awake, sitting on the same sofa, the letters scattered around me, the reliquary firmly in my hand. And as the first ray of sunlight filtered through the dirty living room window, I decided I would follow the map. I would find Elisa. And finally, I would give voice to the story my grandfather sacrificed everything to hide. But I didn't know that what awaited me in that small village would change not only my life, it would also change the meaning of love, loyalty, and courage forever. The map trembled between my fingers as I drove along the narrow roads that cut through the countryside. The morning was drawing in, but there seemed to be a stubborn fog clinging to the twisted trees and cracked asphalt, as if time itself was hesitant to let me reach my destination. The village no longer appeared on modern maps. It was as if it had been erased, forgotten by generations who chose to ignore its history. I followed the hand-drawn coordinates, trusting the ancient markings, the subtle descriptions my grandfather had left. Each kilometer I traveled seemed to take me away from the world I knew and plunge me into a dimension where memories and ghosts coexisted in silence. Finally, the rusty sign appeared on the side of the road. Santa Elisa Village. The name hit me like a whisper from the past. I slowed down. The houses, few and far between, seemed as old as the land itself. Roofs were falling apart, gardens were overgrown with weeds, shuttered windows watched me like suspicious eyes. It was as if the entire village had decided to close itself off from the weather and from anyone who dared disturb it. I parked the car in the central square, a sad space where a dry fountain still tried to look grand under the shade of an ancient fig tree. I got out of the car and took a deep breath. The smell of wet earth, mixed with rotten wood and something indefinable, enveloped everything. A group of old men sitting on a bench watched me in silence. His eyes were hard, worn, but watchful. I approached, trying to appear casual. "Good morning," he said, his voice sounding strange even to me. They just nodded, as if they recognized, but did not welcome. "I'm looking for someone, Elisa Romano." The name fell to the ground like a heavy stone. The old men exchanged glances. One of them, the oldest, with skin marked like old leather, replied, "Elisa doesn't speak anymore. Not since the world forgot about her. Where can I find her?" He hesitated, then nodded toward a path that led away from the square, disappearing between the twisted trees. "Follow the river path. Blue house, last on the road." I nodded in thanks and started walking. I felt his eyes on my back until the fog swallowed me. The trail was uneven, covered in dead leaves. With every step, it seemed like the known world grew further away. Hidden birds sang sad songs among the branches. The sound of the river running somewhere nearby accompanied my steps like a deep, steady breath. Finally, I saw the house, or what was left of it. Peeling walls, broken windows, but still blue. A faded, almost ghostly blue. I knocked on the door. Nothing. I knocked again. The sound reverberated through the empty house. Just as he was about to give up, the door slowly creaked inward, and there she was. A small, fragile woman wrapped in a faded woolen shawl. Her hair, white as ancient snow, fell in fine strands over her shoulders. His eyes, huge and dark, fixed on me with an intensity that took my breath away. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, in a barely audible voice, she whispered, "You have his eyes." My heart almost stopped. She knew. Without me having to say a single word, she knew who I was. She invited me in with a shy gesture. The interior of the house was a time capsule. Old furniture, yellowed photos, the smell of old things and wilted flowers. I sat across from him, feeling small, inadequate. I took the reliquary out of my pocket and placed it on the table. Her eyes filled with tears when she saw him. "He kept this until the end," he murmured, caressing the object with trembling fingers. We were silent for a long moment. Then she started talking, and her every word was like a stone thrown into a lake of forgotten memories. Elisa and my grandfather had met when they were young, when the world seemed less cruel and the possibilities were endless. They loved each other in secret as they lived on opposite sides of a conflict that divided families, villages, and even churches. He, pressured by family, by duty, by fear of what the future might do to those who dared to defy the norms. She marked by a surname that bore the scars of ancient persecutions. They promised to flee, they promised to start over, but the night they were supposed to meet to leave everything behind was the night the storm came, literally and metaphorically. Guards raided the village, searching for subversives and infidels. My grandfather, discovered in his escape attempt, was arrested, beaten, forced to swear allegiance to the rules he hated. In exchange for his family's safety and Elisa's survival, he was forced to disappear from her life, forever, no goodbyes, no explanations. To save everyone, he had to kill his own love. Tears slid down Elisa's wrinkled face as she spoke. I cried too, not just for them, but for all the lost love in the world, for all the stories buried beneath layers of fear, pride, and silence. I needed to decide before I left. She handed me something, a small sealed wooden box. "He left it for you," I said, closing my fingers over the gift. "He said that when he was ready to understand, he would know what to do." I wanted to ask so much. I wanted to beg for more stories, more details, but I understood that that was all she could and wanted to give. We said goodbye with a long, silent hug, and I walked back to the car, the box weighing in my hands like a new reliquary, a new promise. I drove back in the golden light of dusk, feeling as though I carried within me not just a secret, but a mission. When I arrived at my grandfather's empty house, I sat on the couch and stared at the box. I took a deep breath, and I opened it. Inside was a plain, worn, black-covered notebook. The pages, filled with the firm, emotional handwriting I already recognized, told the story of a secret life. And at the end, there was a letter addressed to me, just me. My hands were shaking as I began to read, and the first words made me understand that what I thought was the end of the story was just the beginning. The words danced before my eyes as I tried in vain to control the tremor in my hands. My grandfather's steady handwriting seemed more vivid than ever on the yellowed paper, as if each letter pulsed with the weight of the emotions he had silently carried for decades. "Daniel," the letter began, "if you have come this far, it is because you had the courage to follow the steps that I did not have the strength to complete. Now, the story I never told must find shelter in you." I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath, trying to prepare my heart for what was to come. Not everything we choose to forget ceases to exist. Some wounds just hide deeper, waiting for the right time to be seen. accepted, perhaps healed. Each line felt like a whisper from the past itself, a fragile bridge between generations separated by fear and time. Elisa and I, our story did not end that night. It ended many times, in silence, in letters never sent, in promises buried under the weight of what needed to be done. The lump in his throat tightened as he read. My grandfather had not just lost a love, he had lost himself. The black-covered notebook held between its pages old newspaper clippings, faded photographs, notes scribbled on bread paper. Each item was a piece of the puzzle. The photos showed places I barely recognized: cobblestone streets, empty squares, small stone churches. Sometimes a face would appear in the corner of an image, a shy smile, a glance caught by accident. And in almost all of these images, one constant: the mark of a choice not made, of a path not taken. I spent hours immersed in that little universe. The house seemed to breathe along with me, as if the walls, floor, and ceiling had been waiting for this moment as much as I had. Every note, every disjointed sentence in the notebook was like hearing my grandfather for the first time. A divided man, a wounded man. A man who loved so much that he chose to disappear to protect that which was greater than himself. As dawn came and the high moon cast ghostly shadows across the wooden floor, I found something in the back of the notebook that stopped me in my tracks. An address, simple, no explanations, written in small letters, almost like a whisper on the paper. Monastery of St. Michael, Codex 14. The monastery was known. It was on an isolated hill, a few hours away. I'd always heard that it was a place of profound silence, where monks lived far from the world, dedicated only to prayer and the preservation of ancient manuscripts. Codex 14 seemed like an internal reference, something hidden perhaps among the forgotten archives. My heart pounded. I felt like the letters, the photos, the confessions, all of that was just the surface, that the real secret was there, in that silent monastery, waiting. Kega decided that I would leave at dawn. I lay on the couch, unable to sleep, and let the memories of the night wash over me. I heard, in the cracks of time, my grandfather's heavy footsteps around the house, the creaking of the rocking chair, the whisper of prayers that he never said out loud. I felt his presence there, not as a sad ghost, but as a living flame, waiting to be passed on. And I promised him silently that I would not back down. It didn't matter what he found. The sun rose timidly, dyeing the sky in shades of gold and grey. I prepared a small backpack, took the notebook, the reliquary, and the hand-drawn map that I had found hidden in the house. I got in the car and continued on my journey. The roads wound between silent fields and sleeping villages. The world seemed to hold its breath, as if even nature knew I was heading towards something that did not completely belong to this time. As I approached the monastery, the sight took my breath away. Built of rough stone, it seemed to spring from the very rock of the hill, shrouded in thick mist. Low towers, narrow windows, crosses worn by wind and rain. I parked the car a good distance away and walked to the iron gate. I hit the wood with the heavy hammer hanging from it. The sound echoed through the surrounding valleys like an ancient call. It took a while, but a small window opened in the gate. A monk with an aged face, long beard, and eyes as deep as ancient wells stared at me in silence. "I see Codex 14, he said, unsure whether that was the right password or just a wild hope. The monk's eyes narrowed slightly. For a moment I thought he was going to kick me out. But then he simply unlocked the gate and motioned for me to enter. The interior of the monastery was even more austere than I had imagined. Cold stone corridors, candles flickering in ancient holders, and a silence so thick that it seemed possible to touch it. The monk led me without a word to a small room at the end of a winding corridor. There, on a heavy oak table, lay a single book, old, bound in leather darkened by time, no inscription on the cover. The monk pointed at him and left, leaving me alone. I approached slowly. The smell of ancient parchment and beeswax filled the air. With trembling hands, I opened the book. The pages were covered in meticulous handwriting. They weren't just prayers. These weren't just historical records. They were confessions. Stories of persecution, injustice, and silent pacts made to protect faith, but also to hide truths too dangerous to speak. And in the middle of all that, a name, my grandfather's name, Anthony Roman, intertwined in a record that spoke of a secret mission, of a choice made in sacrifice, of a legacy buried under the weight of history. My blood ran cold. My heart raced. The pieces began to fit together into a picture so large, so profound, that I almost ran out of breath. And then, on the last page, a handwritten note in faded ink. Truth can only be revealed by one who seeks not his own glory, but the redemption of the forgotten. I closed the book reverently. Now there was no turning back. My grandfather's story was not just a love story. It was a story of faith, of silent struggle, of sacrifice that spanned generations. And it would be up to me to finish what he had started. But I didn't know yet that to fulfill this mission, I would have to face the shadows that still haunted the truth. Shadows willing to do anything to maintain eternal silence. I left the small room, carrying the weight of that old book, as if I were carrying in my hands the very history of my family. And perhaps something even greater than I was able to comprehend. The monk was waiting for me in the hallway, in silence. His eyes met mine, and in that moment, without words, I understood that he knew exactly what I had found. He didn't ask anything. He didn't ask me to return the book. He just held out a small leather pouch, heavy in my hand, like a silent gift. Inside, when I opened it discreetly, I saw a rolled-up parchment and an ancient key, carved with symbols I didn't recognize. Before I could thank him, the monk simply walked away, returning to the shadow of the monastery corridors, as if he had fulfilled his role and now belonged only to silence again. I left there with my heart on fire. My grandfather's mission, the unspoken promise, was now mine. And I knew it wasn't just a story of love and sacrifice anymore. It was something that, if revealed, could stir the deepest roots of history. I drove back to town with my hands sweaty on the steering wheel, the reliquary in my pocket, the notebook on the passenger seat, and the monastery book tucked under the seat. Night fell heavily, covering the sky with a blanket of dark clouds. When I arrived at my grandfather's empty house, the feeling was different. It was as if the house was waiting for me, not like before, full of silence and dust, but as a silent witness that something about to happen there would change everything. I spread the documents out on the old kitchen table. The parchment handed over by the monk contained a map even older than the first, drawn with an almost frightening precision. In the center, a symbol, 2 crossed keys over a rose, and below it, an inscription in Latin. In light veritas, in the light, the truth. The key found in the bag seemed to fit something. But where? His heart was beating so hard it almost drowned out the sound of the wind whistling through the broken windows. And for hours, I searched the house for clues, every piece of furniture, every old book, every crack in the walls, until at dawn in the dusty attic, I found it. Behind a shelf full of old tools was a wooden door, too small to be noticed at first glance. A tiny, nearly invisible lock hidden beneath a layer of dust and cobwebs. I held the key tightly. I inserted it into the lock. For a moment, I thought it wouldn't work, but then with a sharp click, the door gave way. The space behind her was narrow, almost claustrophobic. A stone staircase led down to what appeared to be a secret basement, built long before the modern house. The flashlight trembled in my hand as I descended step by step. The smell of damp and old earth was suffocating. At the bottom of the stairs, a small chamber opened before me, and in the center of it, a stone box. On the lid, engraved in bas relief, the same symbol of the crossed keys and the rose. I took a deep breath. I pushed the lid. Inside, wrapped in cloths embroidered with golden threads, lay something I had not expected to find: a gospel. Not just any gospel, but a very old version, written on parchment, in an almost forgotten language, which mixed archaic Latin and Greek. The forgotten gospel that the monastery book whispered existed, the lost manuscript, the uncorrupted word, the essence of a pure faith, before the councils, before the manipulations, before the crowns and the wars. Bidi, my hands trembled as I stroked the surface of the parchment. There were the Master's words in their purest and most forgotten form. There was the message that could set you free or destroy you. A faith based not on fear nor on submission, but on absolute love. In love that does not demand blind obedience, but awakens inner freedom. This was what my grandfather had protected with his life. This was what he never dared to reveal, lest the fragile faith of the multitudes be shaken beyond what they could bear. And now, that weight was in my hands. I sat on the cold floor of the chamber, the gospel on my lap, the lantern casting ghostly shadows on the walls, and I cried. I cried like never before. Not from sadness, but with reverence, of gratitude, out of fear, and a hope so intense that it seemed capable of tearing the very veil of reality. I knew I couldn't just put it out there. I knew that in the wrong hands, that gospel would be used to destroy, to manipulate, to corrupt even more. It had to be protected. It had to be shared in a way that inspired, not crushed, just like my grandfather had done. So the night advanced, and with it, a new dawn approached. I was ready to do whatever it took, even if it cost everything. Even if it meant facing forces greater than I ever imagined, because now I understood. My grandfather's true legacy was not the reliquary. It wasn't the notebook. It wasn't the letters. It was courage. The courage to love to the point of sacrifice, to protect until the last breath, to believe even without applause, even without recognition, even without guarantees, to keep the flame alive, even when everything around only offered darkness. And it was this flame that I now carried, burning in my chest, lighting the way, a path that would take me to places I couldn't even imagine yet, but that I would follow with every fiber of my being, because he trusted me, because the truth was stronger than fear, because love, true love, never dies. And now, it was my turn to protect him. The sun had not yet broken the horizon when I left my grandfather's house, the gospel hidden beneath the makeshift cassock I had found in his old closet. Every step I took seemed to echo, not only in the silence of the early morning, but also within me, as if the world itself held its breath, waiting for my decision. The sky was a blanket of deep blue, dotted with slowly dying stars. I walked to the empty village square where the ancient fig tree still stretched out its branches like protective arms. There before the tree, I said the only prayer I knew how. I didn't ask for success. I didn't ask for glory. I just asked for courage. Courage to protect that which was greater than me, just as my grandfather had done before me. I got back in the car and started driving. No defined destination. I knew I couldn't go back to my old life. I knew that somehow I was already being watched. The last few nights of searching had not gone unnoticed. The monastery, the parchment, the reliquary, the invisible eyes that had long guarded the secret had certainly noticed my steps. I needed to find a safe place, a last refuge where he could think, where he could decide what to do. And in the back of my mind, there was a name that echoed like a forgotten bell. Elisa. She was still the key, the last link to the world that my grandfather had tried to save. I took secondary roads, deviating from the main paths, avoiding guarded highways. The gospel lay in the back seat, wrapped in cloths, like an ancient treasure awaiting its fate. Every kilometer traveled was a fight against fear. Every flash of headlights in the rearview mirror made my heart race. I didn't know exactly what I was afraid of. Get captured, to be silenced, or worse, fail in the mission that had been entrusted to me. After hours of traveling, I reached the trail again that led to the faded blue house. The sun was beginning to dye the sky golden, and the village was slowly waking up, still shrouded in mist. I knocked on Elisa's door with trembling hands. It took a while, but she came. Still small, still fragile, but with a strength in her eyes that hit me like a silent wave. No need to ask. She knew. I knew I had found what so many had tried to bury forever. We entered without exchanging a word. The room remained the same. The smell of aged wood. The silence filled with untold stories. I sat down across from her and placed the gospel on the table, unwrapping it reverently. Her eyes immediately filled with tears. He touched the parchment with trembling fingers, as if touching the memory of a lost love. He murmured. He did it. You did it, I confirmed, my voice breaking. She closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, something inside her seemed to light up, as if an ancient flame had flared up again. So now it's up to you to decide, he said, with a serenity that disconcerted me. Decide what? I asked, although I knew the answer. She smiled, a sad, beautiful smile. If the world is ready for the truth. I stood there, staring at the parchment, feeling the weight of the choice. Spreading the gospel meant risking everything. The faith of millions could be shaken. Structures built on interpretations and dogmas could collapse. But something new could also be born. Something purer, more true, something worth fighting for. Elisa stood up with difficulty and walked to an old chest leaning against the wall. From there, he took out a dark wooden box. He opened it and revealed a small hand press, the kind used to copy old documents. This, she said, is your grandfather's final gift. What for? I asked, feeling my throat close up. To preserve what matters, he replied. To plant the seed, without haste, without fear. We put the gospel under the press, and together we began to copy it, page by page, word by word. The press creaked with each movement, and the smell of ink and fresh paper spread through the house, mingling with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee that Elisa had prepared. We worked all day, and night was already falling when we finished. We had in our hands 2 perfect copies of the gospel. One would stay with Elisa, another would be sent. But where to, and how? It was then that Elisa revealed the last secret to me. Behind the house, under the fig tree, was a secret passage, a tunnel dug decades ago, used to protect the persecuted in times of war. At the end of that tunnel, hidden in an old abandoned cellar, was a wrought iron safe. My grandfather, foreseeing that one day the truth would need to be hidden once again, had left there a map of contacts, a silent network of men and women scattered around the world, dedicated to protecting not just documents, but ideas. Ordinary people, teachers, monks, artists, men and women who believed that true faith did not need golden palaces to survive. All it took was a willing heart. With the map in hand, I plotted my route. I knew it would be a long journey, dangerous, that I would be hunted, watched, maybe even destroyed. But for the first time in my life, I felt no fear. I felt purpose. I felt faith. Not the faith taught in grand cathedrals, but the faith that beats silently in the chest of those who love without expecting anything in return. I left Elisa's house before dawn, taking with me the copy of the gospel wrapped in simple cloths. The path before me was uncertain, But deep within my chest, there shone the unshakable certainty that I was not walking alone. I carried my grandfather's dream with me, Elisa's hope, the love of all those who in silence built a faith made not of fear, but of freedom. And most of all, I knew that wherever I was, he would guide me, because true love never dies. It just changes shape. And now, it was my turn to carry him out into the world, even if, to do so, I had to face the densest darkness. Even if, to do so, I had to disappear, just like he disappeared, not out of weakness, but for love. The world was still asleep as I left the village behind. The road ahead of me wound between mist-shrouded hills as if leading me to a destination as ancient as the mountains themselves. The gospel lay on the passenger seat, protected by layers of cloth and silent prayer. Every beat of my heart echoed with the weight of responsibility. It wasn't just a physical journey. It was a crossing of the soul. For weeks, I traveled from town to town, following the directions on the map hidden under the fig tree. Each stop, each encounter was like lighting a candle in a dark hallway. I have known men and women who guarded their faith with the same reverence with which others guard fortunes. People with eyes that shone with the flame of a forgotten hope. They knew that the truth is not a shout. It is a whisper that crosses generations. In each contact, he left copies of the gospel. He delivered them with his hands and with his heart, knowing that perhaps I would never see the fruits, but planting the seeds anyway. As the weeks turned into months, and over time, I realized something extraordinary. It wasn't just me who changed the world changed me too. I learned that true faith cannot be imposed. It flourishes where love is greater than fear. I learned that heroism is not in grand gestures. It is in the small, silent sacrifices, invisible to the eyes, but eternal before God. One day, in a small village at the foot of a mountain, I found an abandoned church. The cracked walls, the broken stained glass windows, the altar covered in dust. And yet I felt that this was the place. There, hidden under the altar, I left one of the copies of the gospel. Not so that it would be found right away, but so that, at the right time, in God's time, someone would find her. Someone who needed it. Someone who was ready. The years passed. My beard turned white, my hands trembling. But the fire inside me never went out. I continued the mission, discreet, patient, loyal. Did you know that the great walls of the world do not fall with thunder? They fall with the whisper of truth, repeated from heart to heart until no one can ignore it anymore. And today, sitting under the shade of an ancient olive tree, I write these last words. The original gospel remains hidden, protected. The copies, spread like invisible seeds, germinate slowly. There will be no statues. There will be no monuments. There will be no songs in my honor. And that's good, because the truth that really matters doesn't need applause. It just needs souls willing to carry it. Just like my grandfather carried, just like I carry, just as perhaps you will carry. Before closing this notebook, I leave you with one last thought. If you ever hear a whisper between the lines of life, if you feel deep in your chest the certainty that there is something greater than the lies we are told, if you realize that true love requires silence, sacrifice, courage, so you are already part of this story, a story that began before us, and that will continue afterwards, because the truth never dies. She just waits, patiently, inside every heart willing to listen to it. And if one day someone asks who Antonio Romano was, tell them he was a gardener of souls, that planted in silence a seed of faith so deep, so invisible, so indestructible, that neither time, nor fear, nor death could tear it away. And now that seed blooms in you. And to all who have the courage to love without expecting anything in return, Because this is the real miracle. This is the true legacy. This is the true gospel, the gospel of love. If this story touched your heart, comment, "I carry the flame."